All
All right,
right.
I'm hitting the record button.
There
This
it
is a
is.
test. This is Guy Meyer here with my California Times card doing a Zoom interview. My first time ever bringing somebody on board with this experience. I'm here with Jack Wilkinson, who had been my guest in the studio. I think it was more than a year ago. I think it was 2018 when
It
we
was
we talked.
April.
April. And Jack, you are on the Marin County Republican Party. You're a Republican. Well, I'm talking to a Republican again.
Yes. And you
And
haven't melted yet. So
it's a crazy world. It's an exciting world these days. The kind of edge of our seat experience. Um, Tell me exactly what your role right now in the. You've been a part of the Marin County Republican Party. I am guessing for quite a while. How long has that participation been?
I really don't know, Guy.
Oh,
I'm now the 2020 chair
oh, good.
for the Marin County Republican Central Committee.
Hmm.
And I have been involved in Republican politics since, well, for a long time, but I joined the San Francisco Young Republicans in 1967
Wow, wow. What?
after wondering, was I a Republican or a Democrat? And so I decided, okay, I've always kind of been a Republican, but I thought I better understand why
Mm,
instead of just being.
mm.
So I read the two platforms of the parties and decided that I was absolutely a Republican based on the how it conformed to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the idea behind the United States of America. Couldn't be anything but a Republican.
And this go right about to the year 1967? Are we talking that you were
It goes
probably?
exactly to the year
Oh,
1967.
all right, interesting. And where were you at that time? You were a teenager or already in your young 20s or what?
Oh no, I was in my late 20s.
Uh huh. Wow, you're doing well. You're looking so youthful.
Not bad for my age, huh?
You're doing great. Um, I'm kind of convinced that we as individuals, even though we all have our different perspectives, and they come from various sources, from whatever influences we've gathered, but the time frame of which you and I came on, were born, our teenage years, this is can be very formative for individuals. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience was? Maybe even going back to the early 1960s. What was going on there for you?
Well, the history is I grew up in San Francisco in the 50s.
Hmm.
And by the time I was working and I was married and actually divorced. I had a child, and I had paid attention a little bit to civics. You learn the basic things in high school and college, and taken a few poli-sci courses, which I must admit I thought were an oxymoron. Poli-sci, political science.
Ah,
I was going to be an engineer, so until my halfway through my junior year in college, when I changed from engineering to business, I wasn't the best student. Uh, but I had taken a number of physics and science courses and math courses. So I kind of deal with things in a very pragmatic value. Does it work? Does your idea have merit? Does your idea of merit comport to human nature? Subsequent to this, I've always kind of been aware of human nature since I was a little kid. And people seem to do things in their best, or one might say, self interest. Does it benefit me to do something? Altruism is a nice idea, and many of us do things with no expectation of any reward, just that it's a good thing to do and it's good for people. But most people still operate in their own self interest. So looking at politics, which is a high degree of self-interest, most people get involved in politics for self-aggrandizement. A few of us, and the whole idea behind this nation was the citizen politician, to get in and do something for the society in which you live and make it better. The framers of the Constitution did not think of the ideas of parties. They didn't want parties. It was a bad idea. They wanted a government that worked to protect the interests of the citizens. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, that all important second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, those are important words, but the most important word is endowed by their creator. The rights that we have are rights that were given to us at birth by our creator, not by man. Now, the second line after life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness reads, men create governments, but the governments operate at the consent of the government, of the governed rather.
Yeah.
So we have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Somewhere along the line, and I take it back to the mid-30s, well, actually it goes before that. I take it back to one of the worst things that happened was Woodrow Wilson and the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. And I refer you to a very excellent documentary on Prime Video, the Federal Reserve System, which is neither federal nor reserve. It's a private banking system that I'm sure you're aware of that.
Right.
And its benefit, there are benefits to the public, some good benefits, but mostly it's a private banking system. And it created, well, they didn't really create it. It just has used more of excuse me, sometimes I forget words. Fractional reserve banking system. And we haven't got time to go into what that is, but I think if you take a little time, look into it.
Right.
The fractional reserve banking system. And when one looks at interest rates on money, right now I'm looking at getting a new loan from a refi in my house, interest rates at 2.5%. Now, to give a perspective on that for myself, when I was a little kid in the 5th or 6th grade, the Bank of America came around to our school and said, we're going to allow you to open savings accounts with a couple of dollars, $2 or $3. Now, so I went down to the Bank of America and it was paying 3.25% interest. I remember this. I didn't really know much about interest, although I think in the 7th or 8th grade, we were told about or taught compound interest, which is the best thing since the wheel. You understand compound interest?
I remember it from the past.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought that was wonderful. And I looked at the charts. If you left this dollar in there for so long, you'd have so much, $1, $100, $1,000, you'd have so much after this time due to compound interest, which I thought was a wonderful thing. So I started to learn about money. I grew up with the idea is you don't create debt. I wanted a swimming pool in the worst way. I wanted a swimming pool in the backyard, and I kept saying to my dad, let's have a swimming pool. I said, we're not going to get a swimming pool. It costs too much money. There was a commercial on TV in the early and mid 50s, late 50s, from Pacific Plan, the girl from Pacific Plan. And she was a young girl. This is all black and white TV, dark-haired, pretty woman, wore glasses to make her look far more studious and serious. But she was talking about how you can get all this money and how you can pay it back and how wonderful it was. And I said to my dad, we can borrow the money. And he sat me down and he explained interest and the cost of money to me. Well, when I finished reading all that, outside of the stupid idea of having a outdoor swimming pool in San Francisco, in Southwest San Francisco, up by San Francisco State, which wasn't there at the time, that's a bad place to have an outdoor swimming pool. It's just, except for 3 days in September and October. But the cost of money and borrowing money and how much it really costs. So I've adopted this use. Borrowing is a great tool, but to borrow money for frivolous things is foolish, which has brought us as a nation to the brink of we're brinking on disaster because the debt load on the average family for non-essentials, for just pretty things, is horrendous.
Are
The,
you
the amount of money that each places in debt is terrible.
are you referring to like an individual's debt or
Yeah,
the
no,
government
I'm the
itself?
individuals. No, the individuals debt. The government debt's a totally different thing.
Right.
But individuals' debt is an awful lot of people are carrying debt far beyond their means to repay that debt.
Hmm.
And if something happens, most people are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck, which is a dangerous place to be. And the other thing that I noticed was, and this went on, responsibility. We have tremendous freedom in this country, and I think it's wonderful. But freedom has responsibility to it. And freedom is also messy because people do things that you wish they wouldn't do. And at the beginning of the Constitution, James Madison was, why are we going to have a Constitution? And he very simply said, if men were angels, no laws would be necessary. Alas, men are not angels. Human nature has proven that over the last 5,000 years of written history, recorded history, and I base that on the fact that cuneiform, the first real writing, was about 3,500 BC. And all kinds of people have written all kinds of things. The Rosetta Stone was one of the most wonderful things to find because it's allowed us to translate so many different things from the past.
Right.
But if one reads the Old Testament, you see the same things throughout history. Man does bad things. Moses comes down from the mountain. Old Testament, what's he got? 10 Commandments. If we live by the 10 Commandments, we'd probably be much better off. But we've got thousands upon thousands of laws. But the whole point is to protect people against people that break laws. That's essentially what this is all about. You should have freedom. Our government should protect you against things that, and do for you things for which you cannot do for yourself.
Hmm.
Now, most of us can't afford our own police force or fire department, so it's good to have municipal things that do things for us. But freedom is responsibility, and we have to take the responsibility for our actions, which means there are consequences. As there are certain laws that you just can't break. Well, you may think you can. Airplanes defy gravity, but if they lose the energy that keeps it aloft, you can't defy gravity. You let go, it's going to fall. You may not like it, but it's just going to happen. Life is full of that. Sometimes it takes a long, long time for these things to happen.
That's right.
But they will happen.
Hmm.
The Constitution was written and designed as best these people could 250 years ago, contemplating human nature and what people would do. And we're in the midst of this right now. Our voting system must be held as sacrosanct. If we start violating the idea that you can vote and your vote counts, and we violated that terribly, all of a sudden we lose faith in the voting. And it's not important anymore. All of a sudden, if you can't be sure your vote's going to be counted and who's going to count it, I just saw a fella said that he's just disowned his parents. He found out that they voted for Biden in this last election. And he says, I'm not going to visit their graves anymore that they did that.
Well, there's
So the point is, if that happens, we've lost the sacrosanct idea of voting. Our elections have become nothing more but games that people play with ballots.
well, it's bring an interjection. I don't want to take it too much off track, but in the beginning you mentioned partisanship, or a little aside with I can't remember if you brought up George Washington, but
No.
I coincidentally was looking at his farewell address and his conversation about partisanship, because I feel like that's sort of the underlying mess where this young man wants to disown his parents or somebody might want to disown me for what I've done, or whatever. We're in this world where we're not communicating. The partisanship is built up. It seems like the powers that be, there are two groups being steered in different directions. Do you see, as a Republican, as an American, in terms of leadership, it's how do we communicate? How do we find some ability to find some of the basic stuff in common again? Now, so far, there's nothing that you've said that seems in any way you're a quote a conservative person. And not quote, but I mean, as there are in the world, and there are quote liberal people, and there's a vast flow of ideas that make some of us anywhere in between or just our own selves.
Okay, so before we go any further with what you're just saying, I think that we have to look at these two words, conservative and liberal. The word liberal is meant to talk about how wonderful you are. As the Greeks said it, the liberal was the person that would listen to all sides of the discussion and arrive at a conclusion. Liberals now have taken it on, we're the good guys and everything we do is good. If you're a conservative, everything you do is bad because you're against freedom, which is not really true. Conservatives are all for individual liberty. Liberals are for government taking care of everything. And therein lies the big issue between a conservative and, I'm going to use Republican and Democrat. Because Democrats seem to think that the government should be doing more for everybody, which is nice. The problem is, who gets to choose who the everybody is, and where does the money come from to do this? I look at the Great Society, created by Lyndon Johnson in 1965, and it probably had some good ideas, but some of the outfall of what happened there has been terribly detrimental, in particular to Blacks. The aid to families with dependent children, which had been around since 1947 or 48, somewhere in there, which was a good idea. There are people that have families and they need help, and we should help them if we can. I think it's a good idea. One of the things that came out, that families with dependent children was the key. One of the things that came out is that it was said women can't receive welfare payments for children if there's a man in the house. And he sent out social workers that would, at random, come and inspect the property. Is there a man living here? Well, if there was, then they'd stop getting their payments. Okay, well, I can understand that. That's got a certain reason to it, because he should be having a job and he should be supporting it. But of course, we know that unemployment, there was still a degree of racialism there. Black unemployment was higher than usual. So pretty soon you got daddies would not be home. That's where you got daddies not in the house. And look what it's done. It's created a whole rift in the Black family, which had been up until then pretty strong, despite of all the things that happened in the slavery, which oddly enough was, as I recall, there was an amendment that outlawed slavery, and there was a fellow named Lincoln, I think. He kind of passed this amendment.
I heard of him, yeah.
And so that is a problem. That has created a problem that we're dealing with today. I hear all kinds of people saying Trump is a racist. He's Black, and the Republicans are racist. Well, it's the Goebbels School of Public Relations. You, of course, know Goebbels was Hitler's public relations man. He hired him back in the mid-30s. And the first thing he said, if you tell a lie loud enough and often enough, it becomes the truth. And all we've had screaming in the newspapers for the past 4 years is how Republicans are racist, which is kind of sad because we're anything but racist. We passed the amendment to get rid of it. The Democrats then created the Ku Klux Klan and created Jim Crow laws. And all this is happening in the South. I mean, blacks would go up north and there was all kinds of jobs up there. But we're dealing with a lot of lies and mistruths, and people keep promoting those things. The left will not listen to anything but their own side. And if you say anything that they disagree with, they castigate you in the press. And just look at the bias in the press. You said that you like to read Glenn Greenwald. Well, he's okay. You know, he often writes with less bias. You know, he's put out, these are the facts. You just sent me that column
Right.
of his page before this. He put out the facts and he looked at both sides. The conclusion I got from it is that he recognizes that there is a bias in the press and in the presentation. We don't really know what the facts are because they're clouded with bias. One of the things is I was thinking about what we were going to talk about. I was thinking about science. And an awful lot of people are quoting an awful lot of, well, rely on the science, and they have no idea what science is. It's like calling political science science. It's not. It's art. There is nothing scientific. I look at scientific as I looked at calibration. Why do you trust the scale? We have a Bureau of Weights and Measures, and I think they're a good thing to have because what they do is they check scales and is it accurate? And one of the things you learn when you're taking various courses is how do you calibrate an instrument? The pound you put on the scale, is it really a pound? Or is it 17 ounces? Or is it 13 ounces registering as 16? You pay for 16, but you only get 13. Somebody comes along with an absolute number. We know we have a gauge. We measure it. Yeah, it's off. We adjust it to make sure that the scale in the meat market, the gasoline pump, whatever it happens to be that's measuring, is giving you an accurate count of what you're buying based on what it is. That to me is science. There is a criteria against which you measure things. In our conversation yesterday, I mentioned the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, and you agreed. We both agree on that, okay? That becomes a starting point for a discussion. We have an agreement. Is that true?
We do have an agreement with that second paragraph, and the whole paragraph of the the Declaration of Independence is, someone has pointed out to me, it's sort of it's the whole mission statement of what we are as a people.
It is.
It's like, okay, this is what this is our aim. This is what we're putting on our shoulders. Let's go do this. And
Okay.
it's a challenge, and it's right now. It's fascinating how we that the whole experience of liberty versus laws. We understand, like you were saying, that there are needs of laws, that a group of people come together. And I'm thinking, actually, I have in my mind also that the whole Mayflower experience is coming up. I'm not sure if you're remembering that, but it's the 400th anniversary just a couple of days from now, on the 21st of December. Now, the way the world is right now, you're probably not going to see that on December 21st on Google commemorating the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower, because we're somehow in a world of not even paying a little bit respect to the history. But, these people got together and they did the Mayflower Compact, Jack, which I'm sure you know darn well. And that sort of like helped is part of the foundation of this country in terms of what we were doing as individuals leaving England, decided that we're going to sign our names to a compact, to participate, to agree to the group rules, and, to make a go of it.
Right. As you recall from the Mayflower Compact, that it was funded by investors who said you're going to have a commonwealth. So they came over here with a commonwealth idea, which, as you know, failed. It wasn't until they, everybody started having private property rights that we began to survive
Well, it's
and thrive.
okay. Interesting because I may not be as great a expert on the history, but the Puritans, the separatists, and always get confused between the Puritans and the Pilgrims, but their initial journey was funded by a company, that was out as a profit-making motive. They were almost like all a group of indentured servants who
Right.
signed this agreement, got the ship, got equipped. You're going to go and start a settlement. In exchange, you'll be sending back fur or fish or something to make it worthwhile. So there was that sort of financial bargain to even get it going, which is interesting to me. It's sort of like we're still dealing with that today in our country in terms of at what level we're bound by the greater forces of capital, and how do you get it if you're
Well, wait a minute, you're wandering off here. Let's go back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans, the Mayflower, all the rest of them. The original people that came over here under a contract to form a commonwealth, and they were to all operate on the property. And it was almost, I remember back in the early 50s, this is a brief aside, but back in the early 50s, HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, was out looking for communists under every leaf. And you've heard of the McCarthy era. Everybody was, if you're a communist, you're blackballed, etc. And I remember asking the nuns to tell me about communism. And I remember the nuns saying to me, and I was maybe the 5th or 6th grade, wasn't very old, tell me about communism. We can't talk about it. And I thought, what idiocy is this? I'm here to school to learn. You're supposed to educate me. What, you're not going to tell me? So I went to the source of all things, and I asked my dad. Well, my dad's a very intelligent man. And he said, well, basically, it's from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. I walked away thinking, well, I kind of like that. So for the next couple of days, week, I don't know how much longer, I walked around thinking, boy, I like that. I mean, I've got lots of needs, but I don't have many abilities. So I went back to my dad and I said, boy, Dad, that sounds like a good idea. I mean, I've got these needs, but I don't have a lot of abilities. So that'd be a good system. And he looked at me and he said, what makes you think you get to decide? Well, that kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it, Guy?
That's the most important aspect, isn't it? Really, the whole.
Yeah, you don't get to decide. We're going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
We're going to hear a lot about China now. I don't know how much you know about China, but China has been around for a very, very long time. It's a very old society, very old culture. It's gone through an awful lot of iterations. But the basic Chinese believes that there is heaven, there's China, and then there's Earth. That's the basic Chinese belief system. So you and I we're looked down upon by the Chinese.
Well, couldn't you say that might be almost an American experience too, in a way? I mean, we're not Chinese, we're not Canadian, we're not from somewhere else. We're from America. So if you ask, you wouldn't ask that, but in a way, we deal with our spiritual nature and then this reality, USA, and then what?
Yeah, but we've been extremely successful society, the most successful republic in the history of mankind. More people have more things in this country than any other country on earth. So what we're saying is our system, not because I'm an American, I'm better than you. Our system works better for everybody. The Chinese, they believe that they are just better people because they're Chinese, they're in the Middle Kingdom. And then Earth is below the Middle Kingdom. So you're kind of less than what they are because you're not Chinese.
Yeah.
It's a different philosophy. It's a totally different way of looking at it. Yeah. I don't think that any American looks down upon anybody else. We're a pretty open society. We pretty much welcome everybody. I look at Tocqueville's, he was the French
Yeah.
writer that came over here in the third short America. In 1834, he wrote his tome on America. He made a couple of wonderful comments about it. He said, wonderful people, very friendly, very open. We help anybody. If you're walking down the street and you see somebody that's having a problem, you, guy, are going to say, can I help you solve it? You know, guys trying to move something, you'd help them push it out of the way, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You saw a guy trying to push a car, you'd help him, wouldn't you?
I would love that opportunity. You probably would too. It makes you feel good. It gives you something to do.
The point is you would help him. You wouldn't ask about it. You'd just say, hey, let me help you. Just go do it.
Yeah.
That's what Americans do. Well, okay, let me just help you. Very friendly, open people. And the system is going to work wonderfully until the public figures out how to feed at the public trough. And therein lies the biggest issue that we have. And I go back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago. We have so many agencies that are redistributing the wealth. And one of the big reasons people hated Trump is that he was getting rid of the deep state, the swamp. I've mentioned this before, the EPA. The EPA signed into law by Nixon, although it was kind of pushed. It was basically a good idea. Let's protect the environment. Just after the Silent Spring, you read that by Rachel Carson.
No, I never read it, but I feel like I know it without reading it. Maybe that's unfair, but certainly I know what was going on at the time with the ecology movement and the environment. And yeah.
Well, she was all upset about, and to a certain extent, rightly so, DDT, which had been proven itself to be an excellent eradicator of certain diseases and bugs and everything like that.
Yeah.
But it had a negative effect, and she was aware of the negative effect. She made sure everybody else was aware of the negative effect. So we have to take steps to change that. Part of that was the Environmental Protection Agency, which is basically a good idea. Let's protect the environment. Hey, we got to live here. I got to breathe the air. I want to protect it too. The problem is that it has grown far beyond an agency to protect the people, and it's become an agency unto itself. And it engages in extortion. They come along and say, look, you can't build here unless you pay us a certain amount of money or give us land or do things for us. It's far exceeded what it was set out to do.
Well, Jack,
Obama took the Inland Waters Act and said that the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA can determine land to be unfit to be used if it has water on it, even if it's a vernal pool. A vernal pool is created by rain. So it has gone too far without going into all kinds of things. You know, the Fifth Amendment says the government can take your property, but it must pay just compensation. But the words in there, for public use, are very important.
Well, it's just, let me interject here, Jack. Just it's interesting because of how when the term deep state is expressed, you think in terms of the EPA. That's like, it seems like the first element of which you seize. And,
that's just
and
the first,
personally,
that's just one.
I would be looking immediately at the security state, the history of the CIA and Homeland Security. I would say that I think that the EPA and in general, and I think that overall our creativity as human beings, our industriousness, and the success of the civilization and doubling our population in our lifetimes has creates all kinds of destruction to what is known as ecosystems, and in many ways the vitality of many other species, etc. Extinction. So those are values, but I would say that where I tend to believe that there is an element of power in a Republican perspective regarding the environment would be that I would think and hope that if people put it on their own shoulders and weren't so dependent on a series of regulations, if they really felt that they were the prime cause or the prime power uh, to make a change in the world, then it would be the, then many things, many great things are possible. Um,
But I didn't understand what you just said.
basically what I'm suggesting to you is that there is a option in terms of how I, maybe how you or how anybody lives their life. All these choices that we make, whether it be things that we consume or what we choose to put our money into. And I feel like that we, as a group of people, if we had a certain agreement along those lines, have, and even if we don't have agreement, even if it's a completely unconscious thing, as we change the way we, what our values are, what we purchase, what we need in life, we alter our trajectory as a civilization. I think it's really important that we do that, actually, and I think it could make for a happier world.
Okay, well, what's that got to do with the deep state?
Well, it has to do with what the EPA. What I'm just suggesting to you, that the EPA is. I don't see it as. I mean, it's. There's a broad description of that being the deep state, where anything in the government, of course.
Okay, well, let me go back to the beginning of this whole thing.
Right.
The Nolans, who had owned a property on a bluff in Southern California for decades, and they wanted to add an addition to it. And the addition felt well within the zoning of the property. They got all the permits and everything was fine. And finally it came down to an agency said, well, we are not going to let you build that unless you give us a public easement across your property. Well, that's extortion. Now that's the beginning. Wait a minute. That I've followed all the laws, I followed all the regulations. Now you're coming from left field and saying you're not going to give me these permits unless I give you something of value from me. I'm sorry, but these laws were set up and now you're changing it. That was the beginning. That was 40 years ago.
No.
Now,
Well,
I would suggest, there's a farmer up here in just outside of Reading, 750 acres. And during a rain, it flooded. The Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA came in and said, oh, no, you can't farm this because it's got this water on it based on the inland waters. Now, without it take me too long to go into the details, but the fact is it's arbitrary. They come in and says, you can't do this unless you pay us some amount of money. The arbitrary decisions of these agencies is detrimental to freedom. We set up zoning laws and then this is the law that you work with. But if you do all the things that it says and then at the last minute, some bureaucrat comes in and says, oh, by the way, you also have to do something else. And herein lies the problem. The word is bureaucrat. Bureaucracies have one goal, and that's to stay alive and grow. And we are now being governed by bureaucrats. They write rules and regulations that have the full force and effect of law. That's why we have legislatures. The legislature, the Congress, has given up. They started doing this in the late 50s and certainly in the 60s. Their power, because they didn't want to deal with it, to agencies that they create. Some are good, some are bad. But the problem is you now have people that we don't elect that are governing us through the rules and regulations that they write. Excuse me.
Yeah, well, I agree with you in so many ways, but I feel like, and it maybe even in most ways, except I feel like that we're on top of this unlimited growth experience of civilization.
You're talking about something else here. Now you're talking about.
I'm talking about why is there this stress that is being expressed in terms of people getting worried about the environment? It's not, we don't live in the Daniel Boone era anymore, or we don't have the wide open spaces that most humanity in America also, we live very densely, and there's ecological issues going on that.
Okay, so what you're really talking about is the ecology as you perceive it. You have issues about the ecology, and you have issues about the growth rate of population,
Yeah, I think
human
that I
growth.
think that actually to me it comes down to like the underlying issues of what is harming, and the whole dynamic of left versus right is just a battle of dealing with this too many people. And
Well, where do you get this battle on the right? Give me the thing that bothers you about the right and this growth problem that you perceive.
well, I do think that we've got a flood of chemicals, etc., that are all part of modern civilization. That many of them have elements of toxicity, or etc. There's so many different examples, and
Whoa,
people.
wait, you talked about growth. Now, what is it? Are we going to talk about chemicals? Are we going to talk about growth of
We're talking
population?
about our civilization, Jack, as we are, and how do we bring it down to a level where you, as a Republican, start to feel like you're experiencing more freedom, or if you could do that for your descendants, that they have more freedom. And one of the things that I would suggest, and I think the world is going that way anyways, is that we are coming to the point of reaching maybe the flattening of the curve of human population. Certainly in this century is the predictions, and it's to me it would be a vastly more improved world when we start acknowledging that as a positive place to gradually, bring about much more freedom and a much more enjoyable civilization, actually.
Well, so what I'm hearing,
Yeah.
Guy, is that you're concerned about the population growing too big.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay,
I
so
think that's a,
I'm
I think
trying.
that's a lot of the background.
That's what I keep hearing from you. So I'm
Yeah.
just trying to make sure I understand it.
Right.
That that's your concern.
Mm.
Now the question is, what does that have to do with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat?
Well, it's just all I say is it's sort of like an underlying element of what I see as the stressor, the entity that makes I'm say entity, this force that is bringing tension into the whole balance of how do you have a community that are there responsibilities, are we to, if there is a creek going through the neighborhood, are we to care for it? Here in San Anselmo, back in the 50s, they put buildings right over the creek. You probably know that. This wouldn't be done today, but this is part of the give and take of what level do we protect, what level do we want to open up our world to be one that, you know that the coho salmon might even run up the creek in San Anselmo again. To me, this is the big challenge of.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with Democrat or Republican? I don't see the connection.
Well, you were immediately when you talked the deep state, you went off regarding the EPA, which I think to me is like tends to be a rubber stamp of denial. I think but I think it still can be used intelligently as a
Okay,
force.
so what I'm hearing is what I've said to you has not registered. So I think that I have to
Well,
give you some
oh,
more information
all right,
as to some of the
help me out then.
negatives. Huh?
Help if you think what you've said hasn't registered, help me out. But I
Well,
feel
no,
like it
I'm
has.
talking about what I'm talking about is the arbitrary nature of the EPA in extorting things from people, either
Well,
giving them land or trading off
I,
things
I
like this.
I agree with you, Jack, and I agree even locally that there is a great deal of overreach or intrusion in terms of protecting nature, looking out at West Marin, and I don't know all the facts, but it seems that a lot of people who have property that run up against the creeks are having to deal with all kinds of elements that seem way overboard. I know there are elements of the building codes that became incorporated with green features back 20, 30 years ago that oftentimes are just money spent that, you know, it doesn't have any real fundamental bearing on it. These are elements of kind of the overreach. What I'm suggesting to you is that I feel like we're on this verge. You can see that the people have made the studies of population growth in the industrialized countries. It's all tending to be leveling off or even dropping a great deal. And I feel like this is going to, it's a positive for humanity to understand or to want to have a world that you share with other life forms besides humanity in a very healthy way. And I feel it needs to happen. And I think that in terms of immigration, which I think is one of the principal stressors also of the whole partisan malaise.
Okay, please, you're kind of losing me. If we're talking about population exceeding the ability of Earth to support it, that's what I keep hearing. You mentioned this before.
No, I'm not.
So
I'm not. I'm saying to you that I think I think the Earth is proving how generous and resilient it can be to humanity. I'm suggesting to you that there is an improvement and or a better place when we start backing off and I see it happening naturally, and I feel that the Republican urge to simply acknowledge immigration via laws, etc., is
what's that got to do with immigrant? Please, you're losing me. What's that
well.
got to do with?
Let me help you.
Please do.
We're talking about population of the USA, our own population, our own rights as Democrats and Republicans who make these laws, whether they be in Congress or in Sacramento or whatever, to try to take care of this group of people that are within this democracy. And so when we have a quote housing crisis in California and we are mandated to build more and more, when we have the footprint of us citizens, us good citizens, whether they be Democrat or Republican, I think it would make everybody happier and healthier if we saw it going in a gentler direction, where instead of filling up the valleys of the Central Valley or the East Bay with more and more development, that it was going the other direction. It was like,
so, but I don't see what this has to do with politics, Republican or Democrat. I don't see the connection.
You don't think that you don't think there's underlying that there's just as you go through California, you're stuck in traffic and half the cars.
No, I understand what you're saying there. I don't see the connection between Republican or Democrat there. You prefaced what you just said, if Republicans would, and then you went off into we're filling up the valleys. I don't see where Republicans.
I just tend to believe that much of the stress of the immigration issue is actually involved with people's believing that our country and the communities are not improving. We're becoming much more crowded, overpopulated, hard to get around world, and that's like an environmental issue that to me triggers lots of stress, whether it be on the left or right. I mean, I guess you don't agree, you don't see it.
Well, no, I don't see the connection. I'm not. And when you say immigration, I don't see what that has to do with it. And you mentioned Republicans and immigration. What have we got to do with immigration?
Republicans? I mean, what's the last 4 years of what's the major issue with President Trump and the quote divisiveness? Isn't it
It
really?
wasn't immigration, it's invasion. Now, we've been open to immigration. We've set up a program since the very beginning of our republic where people can come to this country. We welcome them. We ask them that they come into our country, and they abide by our laws and customs. It's that simple.
Hmm.
Now, we didn't say you can come across anytime you want, and then we'll give you all this benefits. This is the issue. I think you're confusing them because invasion is totally different than immigration. People that cross your borders illegal without your permission in the dark of night, they aren't here to do you any damn good. They're here to take from you. And that's what President Trump was trying to stop. Do you want people to just walk in and give me your address? Because if that's what you believe, I want to come over to your house and I want to get what you have inside. And if you're open to it, I mean, you must be open to that illegal immigration or invasion.
Well,
That's what it sounds like.
Jack, actually, I have kind of I haven't registered as a Republican, but
Stop. I'm asking you a
But I
question. It
am.
has nothing to do with party.
Well,
Has
all right.
nothing to do with party.
Then listen. No, there's no invitation that I'm offering to anybody to come to this country without going through legal channels, none whatsoever. And I think that it would be. I think a lot of the problem is that if the Democrats realize that was not a benefit to the country, that it actually tends to be a corruption. If you're looking at holding up some magic of an economic benefit, that therefore it's okay. I think that tends to be a corruption. I'm kind of confused about this whole census issue with Trump. I don't quite get that if you have 11 million people who did not legally enter the country, that now you're going to base your congressional districts upon that. I don't quite get it. The Supreme Court ruled. It seems like maybe there's something wrong with that. I think
the Supreme Court ruled that his denial of counting them towards congressional seats is legal because they're not citizens. How do you count non-citizens in your government census if your government money and ruling is going to be supported by that? If we have non-citizens, the important word there is non. So if you want to come here and you want to be part of our experiment, we welcome you. But if you're just going to come in here and sneak in the back door and then you expect to get counted, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And
well,
that's
I think that we're making a lot of sparks probably about things that we might have more agreement than we realize. It's been very interesting talking to you again, Jack. And it's an interesting world, and I believe that we can work it out, and it ain't easy. And
I'm just trying to understand what the issues that you're talking about are, and they're not always clear. I mean, there's immigration and there's invasion, and there's a significant difference between the two. Immigration is what this country was built on. I'm second generation Irish, and my grandmother came over here, filled out all the rules, did all the things. My mother was born. My great-grandfather, he was from great-great-grandfather from Scotland, came over here in the late early 1800s. We're all immigrants. I'm all for it, but you come in based on the rules and regulations set up by the society, the house you're coming in. You're a guest in the house.
I agree with you. I've been a hard liner on that myself. Which, according to my friends, I voted for Pete Wilson in 1992 as governor. You know, I totally agree with you on that. I also agree with Barbara Jordan's as the chair and a report back in 1995 or 1996 on immigration. I think that legal immigration needed to be reined in 25 years ago. That's sort of my, I'm just, I think we could send a message to the planet, send a message to Nigeria or India or all these places that, hey, You got to start taking care of your own problems. We all do. And one of the problems is that you just can't keep growing and growing exponentially as a human experiment before disaster happens. Now, it hasn't happened yet, generally speaking, but this is, I feel like that's what we have to address. And I think that I feel personally that the Republican values that are attempting to be expressed are seeing that same thing. You see it that I'm completely off in some kind of strange tangent. I feel like it's a very real and physical force that is that we're all like the frog in the boiling water. Need to start kicking a little bit and go, hey, this is getting a little.
The water's getting warm.
Water's getting a little warm. Maybe we should wrap it up. We've had a good hour talk, Jack.
Did we? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, it's always delightful talking with you, guy. I look forward if you ever want to call me again.
It's a challenge.
I welcome your
love
call.
it. I love it too. It's good. All right. Well, cheers. All the best to you, and I hope somebody finds some sparks of life in this conversation for sure. We got that much.
All right.
All right.
All right,
Cheers.
guy.
Take care.
Have a good
Thanks.
afternoon, sir.
All right. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.